For weeks, the Ohio House of Horrors case has focused on the parents. But now another member of the family has become the center of attention, not because prosecutors filed new charges, but because the children's grandmother is now asking a question that could reshape her entire defense. Should she even stand trial? As the legal battle enters a new phase, a new debate is growing across the country. How much responsibility does a grandparent have when children are living under the same roof? Can someone be held criminally responsible simply because they own the house? Or does the law require proof that they knowingly allowed the abuse to continue? Those questions are now at the heart of Christina Siders' defense. Christina Siders, the 66-year-old grandmother in the case, faces the same child endangerment charges as her husband, Gary Siders Sr., her son, Gary Siders Jr., and her daughter-in-law, Elizabeth Siders. All four have pleaded not guilty. According to investigators, 16 children were removed from the property after authorities described living conditions so severe that they shocked even experienced law enforcement officers. Prosecutors have alleged that the children suffered significant physical and emotional harm, and that all 16 have since been placed in specialized therapeutic foster care because of the trauma they experienced. But Christina's attorney says there is another side to the story. In newly filed court documents, the defense argues that Christina did not directly abuse the children. Instead, her attorney says she was simply the owner of the property where her son's family was living. The defense also emphasizes that Christina has no prior criminal record, fully cooperated with investigators on the day of her arrest, and remained with law enforcement for questioning without an attorney present. Her attorney further argues that the evidence provided so far does not demonstrate that Christina personally caused serious physical harm to any of the 16 children, while acknowledging that authorities considered the conditions inside the home severe enough to remove the children from their parents' care. That argument immediately raises one of the biggest legal questions in the entire case. If a grandparent owns the home, lives there, and knows children are living in dangerous conditions, does that alone create criminal responsibility? Or must prosecutors prove that the grandparent actively allowed the neglect or failed to act despite having a legal duty to protect the children? Those are very different legal questions, and the answers could determine Christina's future. Prosecutors are expected to argue that this was not a situation where someone simply rented out a house and never returned. Instead, they may argue that Christina lived with the family, saw the conditions every day, and had every opportunity to recognize that something was terribly wrong. The defense, however, is expected to argue that simply living in the same home does not automatically make someone criminally responsible for every decision made by another adult. That legal battle is only beginning. And before a jury ever hears this case, the court must first decide whether there is enough evidence to support the prosecution's theory against the grandmother. In the next part, we examine the specific arguments both sides are expected to make, and weigh Christina's role inside the home may become one of the most contested issues in the entire Ohio House of Horrors case. The central question is no longer what investigators found inside the house. That part of the case has already been widely reported. The new question is whether prosecutors can prove that Christina Siders was legally responsible for what happened to her grandchildren. That is a much higher legal standard than many people realize. According to court filings, Christina's attorney argues that the state has not yet presented evidence showing that she personally abused any of the children or directly caused the serious physical injuries described in the criminal charges. The defense says the evidence produced so far mainly establishes that she lived at the property and that the conditions inside the home were extremely poor. Her attorney also emphasizes several facts that the defense believes weigh in Christina's favor. She is 66 years old. She has no prior criminal record. She has lived in southeastern Ohio her entire life. According to the motion, she cooperated with investigators during the execution of the search warrant and remained for questioning without an attorney present. The defense argues that these facts show she is not a flight risk and does not pose a danger to the public. But prosecutors are likely to present a very different picture. The issue may not be whether Christina personally struck or physically harmed any of the children. Instead, prosecutors could argue that criminal responsibility can also arise from knowingly allowing children to remain in dangerous conditions if a person had a legal duty to protect them. That is why Christina's role inside the home could become one of the most important issues at trial. Investigators have alleged that 16 children were living in conditions so severe that they were immediately removed from the home. If prosecutors can show that Christina regularly lived there, observed those conditions, and failed to take action, despite understanding the risks, they may argue that her inaction contributed to the children's endangerment. The defense, however, is expected to challenge that conclusion. Simply being a homeowner or even living in the same residence does not automatically make someone criminally responsible for every action taken by another adult. The defense may argue that prosecutors must prove far more than proximity. They must establish what Christina actually knew, what authority she had inside the household, and whether she had both the ability and the legal obligation to prevent the alleged neglect. Those questions are likely to become a major focus as the case moves forward. Another issue that may influence the court is Christina's request to modify her bond. Her attorney argues that the current $300,000 bond is beyond her financial means. The motion states that she has family members willing to provide housing, that she would comply with GPS monitoring if released, and that her documented medical and mental health conditions could be better treated outside the county jail. For now, prosecutors have not publicly responded to those requests. The judge will eventually have to decide whether the defense has presented enough information to justify reducing Christina's bond while the criminal case continues. In the next part, we examine why Christina is also asking for a mental competency evaluation and what that request could mean for the future of the entire case. While the debate over Christina's legal responsibility continues, her defense has introduced another issue that could significantly affect the timeline of the case. Her attorney has formally asked the court to order a mental competency evaluation. That request has attracted national attention because Christina is now the third member of the Siders family to seek such an evaluation. According to the court filing, the defense argues that there is reason to believe Christina may not fully understand the court proceedings or be able to properly assist her attorney in preparing her defense. Because of that, her attorney is asking the judge to order an independent psychological evaluation before the criminal case moves forward. This request does not ask the court to declare Christina innocent. It also does not claim that she was legally insane when the alleged crimes occurred. Those are two very different legal questions. A competency evaluation focuses only on the present. The examiner's job is to determine whether the defendant currently understands the charges, understands the role of the judge, prosecutors, and defense attorneys, and can communicate effectively with counsel during the trial. Former Franklin County Prosecutor Ron O'Brien explained that competency evaluations generally examine two basic issues. First, whether the defendant understands the nature and seriousness of the criminal charges. Second, whether the defendant can meaningfully assist their attorney in preparing a defense. If either of those abilities is missing, the court may find that the defendant is not currently competent to stand trial. That finding, however, would not end the prosecution. If Christina were found incompetent, criminal charges would remain in place. Instead, court proceedings would usually be paused while doctors attempt to restore the defendant's competency through appropriate treatment. Only after competency is restored can the criminal case continue. According to the discussion presented in the court filings, a court-appointed psychologist would likely interview Christina about her background, the charges against her, her relationship with her attorney, and her ability to understand the legal process. The evaluation may also include standardized psychological testing designed to measure reasoning, memory, judgment, communication, and decision-making. The expert interviewed in the case also noted that if the first evaluation concludes a defendant is not competent, prosecutors may request an independent second evaluation. If experts disagree, the court may consider additional opinions before making a final decision. That process is designed to reduce the risk of an inaccurate finding and to ensure that competency decisions are based on professional medical evaluations rather than assumptions. For many people following this case, the timing of these requests has become just as important as the requests themselves. Gary Siders Jr. previously sought a competency evaluation. Gary Siders Sr. later filed a similar request. Now, Christina has done the same. Whether those motions reflect individual medical concerns or separate legal decisions made for each defendant has not yet been determined by the court. What is certain is that these requests have added another layer of complexity to an already extraordinary criminal case. In the next part, we examine what could happen next, how the judge may rule on Christina's requests, and why the court's decisions could shape the future of every defendant in the Ohio House of Horrors case. As the Ohio House of Horrors case moves toward its next stage, the judge now faces several important decisions. Should Christina Siders receive a lower bond? Should the court order a mental competency evaluation? And perhaps most importantly, is there enough evidence for the case against her to move forward exactly as prosecutors have presented it? Those questions remain unanswered. What is clear is that both sides are preparing for a legal battle that could last months. The defense has argued that Christina is not a danger to the community. Her attorney says she has no criminal history, has strong family support, has lived in southeastern Ohio her entire life, and would comply with strict release conditions, including GPS monitoring, if the court grants a reduced bond. The motion also states that she has documented medical and mental health conditions that could be treated more effectively outside the county jail. Prosecutors, however, are expected to focus on a different issue. They are likely to argue that this case is not simply about where Christina lived. It is about whether she knowingly allowed 16 children to remain in conditions that investigators describe as dangerous and harmful. If prosecutors can convince a jury that Christina had both knowledge of the conditions and a legal duty to act, they may argue that criminal responsibility extends beyond the children's parents. The defense will almost certainly disagree. Its position is expected to be that suspicion alone is not enough. In a criminal trial, prosecutors must prove every element of the charges beyond a reasonable doubt. That includes proving Christina's own actions or failures to act, not simply her relationship to the other defendants. Another important question is whether all 4 defendants will continue moving through the court system at the same pace. If competency evaluations delay 1 or more defendants, the court could face additional procedural decisions before any trial begins. For now, no jury has heard the evidence. No verdict has been reached. And the legal arguments presented by both sides are only the beginning of what is expected to be a long and closely watched case. One fact is already clear. This investigation is no longer focused only on what happened inside the house. It is now about determining who, under the law, should be held criminally responsible. That distinction may ultimately decide the future of every defendant in this case. As more court hearings take place and additional evidence becomes public, the answers to those questions may finally begin to emerge. Until then, the debate continues. Was Christina Siders simply a grandmother living in the same home? Or did she have a legal responsibility to protect the 16 children that prosecutors say was never fulfilled? That is a question only the court can answer. And it may become one of the most important issues in the entire Ohio House of Horrors case.